Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. We're going to give everyone just a minute or so to get settled in, wait for anyone else to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, Jennifer. Good to see you. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started because I know we have a lot of great content to get through today. Just as we get started, we'd love for everyone to just take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box and share why climate change education is important to you. And go ahead and everyone can keep doing that. Share your introductions in the chat and we will go ahead and get started. Just a few logistics to get started with. I wanted to share that this webinar will be recorded and shared out publicly, but without the chat or any of your private information. And then just a reminder to everyone that Zoom does have closed captions if those are helpful for anyone today. And before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the Empathetic Environmentalist Program and how this webinar and work came to be. This project was funded by and developed in partnership with the Longview Foundation. The project was designed to help students learn about climate change and its effects on their own communities, explore stories and perspectives of diverse communities being impacted by climate change, and build solidarity with others as they take compassionate and informed action together. I also wanted to highlight that September 15th to 24th is UN Global Goals Week that encourages action, awareness, and accountability for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this spirit, we're excited to facilitate this discussion today about how we can be part of this movement. So first things first, before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to pass it to Jennifer, the Executive Director of the Longview Foundation, who is able to join us today just for a short welcome message.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. It's lovely to be with you all. I will keep it brief because I want to hear from our panelists and learn today. But mostly, I just want to say thank you to Empatico and to all of you educators who have participated in this training. I'm so grateful for your commitment to create a better classroom environment for your students and a better world for us all to live in. It makes me extremely hopeful for the future. I'm very grateful for Empatico for their leadership on this work, and I can't wait to learn from you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your kind words and for being here today and all of your support on this project. So I would love to introduce our panelists now, and I will pass it over to Dr. Jenn Chow to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my name is Jenn Chow, and I am currently the interim director of the UCI Science Project, and we are located in Southern California. I'll go ahead and pass it on.
I'm Mike Jabot. I am a SUNY Distinguished Professor of Science Education at the State University of New York at Fredonia.
Thanks, Mike. We'll pass it to Elaine.
Forgot to unmute myself. This is Elaine Miller-Karras, and I am the co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute and a founding member of the International Transformation Resilience Coalition, ITRC for short, which is a climate change advocacy group that looks at the psychological impact of climate change on our human population.
Thank you, Elaine. I will pass it to Abdul next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul Malek. I'm an educator currently based in Bangladesh, which is also oftentimes referred as a ground zero for climate impact. Primarily, I'm working with teachers and also program designers who can facilitate better learning opportunity for the kids who are particularly vulnerable for climate changes, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Abdul. And Jennifer. go next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Travis. Happy International Day of Peace to everyone joining in. I am the Executive Director of Take Action Global and the founder of the Teach SDGs Network, longtime friend of the team at Empatico, and also partner with Longview Foundation. So really excited to be a part of today's conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And my name is Travis Hardy. I am the Senior Director of Programs here at Empatico. And again, really excited for everyone to be here today. Just a reminder for anyone who's just joining us to please introduce yourself in the chat and share why climate change education is important to you. With that, we will go ahead and get started with our first question. Would like to begin just by discussing what exactly climate change is. Jenn, could you please kick us off?
Thank you, Travis. And I should have previously mentioned that we had the privilege to collaborate with Empatico on these lessons for the empathetic environmentalists. So before we dive into the panel session today about climate change, we need to really get clear on the difference between climate and weather when discussing climate change. So oftentimes this is built into the lessons for our littles and also our older students too, so that we can really discuss, well, what is the difference between weather? What is the difference between climate, right? And as humans, like what kind of climate solutions can we come up with? So in terms of weather, that's the fluctuation in temperature, rain, right? So that means it's the day-to-day changes. And then when we're talking about climate, we're talking about the average weather conditions when we're taking into consideration extremes as well, which we are experiencing now. Right. So climate change essentially is the long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. So in the lessons that we helped develop, we gave a little cute scenario for students. And when we describe to students about weather and climate, we say climate is kind of like the wardrobe that you're wearing, right? Or your closet. And then weather is really like what you're wearing today. So on the very next slide, I'm going to use that slide to help us describe the main driver of climate change, which is the greenhouse effect. So as you're looking at this animation, it shows that Earth's temperature really depends on a balance between energy. And that energy is coming from the atmosphere it's passing through, and it could either be reflected back into space, right? Or it could be absorbed by the Earth. So certain greenhouse gases that are prevalent now in our surface, like methane and water vapor and carbon dioxide, right? That's actually getting trapped, and it acts like a blanket that's causing the Earth to warm up. This recent greenhouse gas buildup within the last, I would say, about 80 years, right, is basically because of humans, right? Human activities like burning of fossil fuels for energy. So this leads me to this basically greenhouse effect, right, causes global warming and climate change. So on the very next slide, as we're talking about our students, right, and how we're going to engage our students as learners, right, we want our students to be the drivers, essentially, of their learning. So this is an example of how we can show students how they can become scientists, right? And as a community, use this evidence and this animated image so that they can really discuss, hey, what are the observations that you see when you're looking at this animation? And what kind of questions might you have? So as we're looking at this image, that map on top shows us that in 2002, right, when we're comparing the temperature to the past, and the map shows from 1991 to 2020, we see that in red, there's areas that are a lot warmer. In blue, there's areas that are a lot cooler, right? So you can pull the students' kind of prior knowledge, but also their funds of knowledge or how they know what they know by looking at this graph. So I think that students really benefit from looking at coming up with a scientific consensus, right? Because we know that climate scientists have agreed that over 97% of climate scientists have agreed that humans are increasing the rate of global warming as well as climate change.
Thank you so much, Jenn. And I think that that theme is going to come up on some of our other questions later on as well. Is there anything else that any of our other panelists would like to add just about defining climate change? Okay, great. With that, we'll move into the next topic. And before we get to the next question, I want to think a little bit, we all can reflect that the topic of climate change can feel overwhelming to think about. So we want to pause and center our conversation on hope. So Elaine, I would love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, so one of the things that we know that is important for all of us, and when we hear some of the statistics that were just shared, it can be very disconcerting for adults and children. And I'll say a little bit later about what we know about what's happening with kids in terms of their perspectives and their psychological well-being regarding climate change. But one of the things that I have found that's important for all of us to remember what else is true. And at this moment, as we're going to be hearing a lot about the impacts of climate change, what or who uplifts you? What or who gives you strength? What or who helps you get through hard times? And for some of you, you might even want to think about, maybe one of the successes that you had in your community or with the children that you work with when you were able to have a positive impact on something that we know that impacts our carbon footprint, for example. So if we can just spend a moment to think about the answers to these questions, and you don't have to answer each one, but I also invite you to put your answers in the chat.
Thank you, Elaine. I love this strategy. We've talked about this before, and it really is helpful as kind of a first step in grounding and thinking about something so overwhelming as climate change. So this segues, I think, nicely into our next question. There are a lot of difficult emotions that we might experience when discussing this topic, and we wanted to take some time to talk about how we can navigate these emotions and also help our children and students navigate them. So Elaine, again, can I turn it to you?
I thank you so much. And I really think it's important that we acknowledge that it happens. Some people I talk to will go, oh, the kids don't really necessarily know what's going on. Well, the kids do know what's going on. And I wanted to give you a little bit of information that comes from Dr. Caroline Hickman and her associates. They surveyed 10,000 children, and these were teenagers in 10 countries: Australia, Brazil, Finland, France, India, Nigeria, Philippines, Portugal, the UK, and the USA. And what they found was that the respondents across all the countries were worried about climate change. 59% were extremely worried, 84% were at least moderately worried, and more than 50% reported each of the following emotions: sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and guilty. So when we see these kinds of reactions and we're studying these, how can we build hope and resilience? And I think some of our other guests today are going to talk about this, but I think one of the most important ways is how can we give children other ideas of how they themselves and their school, their community can do something to mitigate the impact of climate change.
Thank you. And as you start thinking about that to the audience, please share any ideas of what has worked well for you or strategies that maybe you want to try using in the future. We've included a few ideas on the slide here about how to support students, but I want to turn to Abdul and Jennifer Williams to share any of your thoughts as well.
Sure, thanks. I think just to build on what Elaine shared, oftentimes, particularly in our context from Global South, I think, especially in Bangladesh, where we're the contributing very significant to the the climate change effects, but the majority of the burden that we're bearing, and particularly those students when get to know these facts, just imagine how much anger or the stress or overwhelming things that going on, what we're living for them to really for the future. From that perspective, it's really important to really recognize those kind of emotions and stress and cultivate what can possible future that we really build them for the next upcoming days. And through where I think this is this one of the big thing that I personally experience when we open up this kind of conversation. I think conversation actually have the power to see what are the possibilities are there and how we can collaborate and make a collective effort to really address such kind of things. And installing such kind of hope, if really can build on the next generation, but they can really see what the possibilities are, rather not I think there's a tendency in our current existing education system oftentimes to not really sharing the authentic information what is happening and how that can be also addressable. And when you're also sharing the climate challenges, oftentimes it also seems to young children particularly it's unsolvable. But the thing is, the challenge is there, but also how can we address some of the pieces to give them the necessary tools, resources, as well as building that kind of I think mindset is also really important. So just inviting some of the guest speaker in the classroom to really see what's happening and how they can also be part of that solution. I think that's something really, really important. So that's something there's some of the strategies that you can really work on classroom. And I personally feel that really work in my context. So Jennifer, would you like to add anything else?
Yes, thank you. I love this question. I have the pleasure of listening to young people every day in our work because we're focused on climate education for all. So we're hearing from young people all around the world. So young children up to university level youth. And I think, as Travis mentioned, this is a big week. So we have Global Goals Week, we have UNGA, we have Climate Week, we have International Day of Peace. So I think there's a lot of eyes on our youth right now, a lot of action happening in New York. I know, not far from Mike. So I just returned last night and I was at all of those events in New York City. I was part of the climate march on Sunday with 75,000 youth and adults who were taking to the streets. I was also a part of the largest march back in 2019 with Greta. I think there were a number of Empatico team members there that day too. So the largest march of our time in 2019, the second largest this week. And I knew that I was going to be coming here today. So I wanted to take notice of what I was seeing in terms of how youth are feeling. Something that definitely stood out for me, different from other climate weeks, UNGA weeks of past, was that before it was, how can we get one voice, one youth voice here representing? So I would join on panels or I would be at events and maybe they would have one young person. That was very different this year. I felt like the youth were really taking to the stage and leading the conversation, not just invited to be part of it. I also did recognize their emotions that they were expressing around climate change. I heard a lot of them sharing that they are growing impatient. A lot of the early youth activists are not youth anymore. They are adults now, and they're running their own nonprofit organizations. They are assembling, and they are ready for action. We also just had the Yale research come out. And for me, this was really interesting and something that I'm going to continue to take back to young people as they express their emotions. But what it found was that they saw those who are distressed are likely the ones who are taking climate action. So there's a lot of big emotions with young people, but we're also seeing a lot of engagement, which I think is great for us as educators, because that helps us to create paths forward. So I think the practical ideas here are great ones. We think about climate action across the curriculum. Every educator can be a climate educator. And for me, we always start with teacher identity. So I know when Jenn was sharing about the climate science part of the work, that's where I start to get a little intimidated because my background isn't science, it's literacy. So we do focus a lot on teacher identity and how teachers can get the information that they need to be supported as they bring these conversations into the classroom. The next thing I do when I'm working with teachers is start with climate conversations. So just open the floor for them to share about how they're feeling. And what I find is they have a lot to say, and maybe they haven't been asked that before, but a lot of them are already doing the work. I have a podcast, I run a blog, I'm marching in street rallies. So just giving the floor to them and knowing that you don't have to be the expert on the actual science. You can be vulnerable and co-learn with them. So I think for us as teachers, it can be those small steps and just making space for the students to help lead the way through it.
Thank you so much to you both. It's really powerful to hear those reflections, Jennifer, about the youth involvement this year at UNGA and all the events happening around it. And it really feels like a common theme in your answers too is just around giving youth a sense of empowerment to be part of the solutions, which we'll definitely talk a little bit more about later on today too. I want to open it up to any of our other panelists to add anything before we move to the next question.
I just want to add to what Jennifer said about those wonderful young people in Montana who said it was their constitutional right and actually sued the state of Montana, and they won. And how empowering is that for taking their anxiety about climate change and fossil fuels and actually winning a landmark court case? So, I mean, that's possible. And when that just brings tears to my eyes when I say it out loud. So wanted to add that to Jennifer's words.
Thank you, Elaine. Okay, I will move us on to the next question. So we want to take a moment to focus on empathy. As you can maybe tell, it's the driving force behind the Empathetic Environmentalist program. So what is the role of empathy in understanding climate change? And what is empathy? So first, we wanted to define that. It's an important skill that helps us understand and care about others' feelings and experiences. And empathy has three parts: feeling, thinking, and acting. So we recognize and show concern for someone's feelings, think about their unique situation and perspective, and take action to support them. And we can also practice empathy towards ourselves, people we know, and even people who may initially seem different or unfamiliar to us. We see that empathy plays an important role in understanding climate change and taking action as a global community, as it enables us to show curiosity about others' perspectives and ideas, care about others' feelings and experiences, and communicate and collaborate respectfully. When we practice empathy, not only do we consider how climate change will impact us and our local communities, but also understand and care about how climate change will impact people living in communities all around the world, especially during times like this week with Global Goals Week. By cultivating empathy, we're better able to express our own emotions and experiences, seek out and elevate different voices, and act to protect and restore the world around us. So I'd love to pass it back to Abdul again to share any perspectives that you have on empathy as an educator and how it kind of plays a role in these conversations.
Sure. So I think one of the big components of like building empathy among the young generation is something really, really important. And one of the key factors of like active listening and perspective taking. While I was teaching in a government primary school, many of my students were also like climate displaced students. Just for context, Bangladesh is currently encompassing about like 170 million population in comparison to with the similar like land size of the state of Iowa, which enlists only 4 million population. So you can see like how like the densely populated country it is, and also like really like enclosed by like different like land masses, particularly the riverine nature of the country. And since many of my the students were like really vulnerable and so displaced because of this space, while UNDP is forecasting by 2050, maybe 25 million of this like the people will be displaced by the climate vulnerability in the coastal region, the southern part of this. And one thing that came out to me while I was like teaching in my classroom, many of the students were like climate migrants was there. They're really mindful about the utilization of the resources, particularly water. And that kept me thinking why they're like acting in that space. And that also like oftentimes they get bullied, not like using like act differently, particularly using resources, or like mindful of like how they can be very minimalistic from the other peers who are not like experience such kind of experiencing who are the peers. And when I like started practicing like this kind of conversation, climate happened. And when my students were like climate migrants, they shared their perspective, how like the scarcity of the water because of the salinity intrusion in the groundwater is really like left them behind like nothing, with the very shortage of like drinking water, and how this is like accurate like really and like problem their context to like having like 3 liters of water in a day for a person, and that might be like very abundant in like other context. And listening that kind of like the perspective from like other students who have like experiencing these pieces. Many of the students who have do not like experience this piece, they try to like change their behavior and be very mindful about the uses of the water consumptions. So I think that kind of like perspective taking like really bring those kind of values. What is really means like climate change in a day-to-day life. I think oftentimes when an adult like talk to like what climate change is, look like there is something like this coming, but I think this is already happening, and how that will like really impact on your day-to-day life. I think that's really important to like start that conversation, and like when you like empathize with these people. And I think that where you can really like think of like what like an individual take an action from their own perspective, and how that can cascade down or like the build the collective movement, and really we can catalyze this process of like being like very minimalistic, and like how can like also like address this kind of issues not in our country but also globally. So I think those perspectives really help me to like building that kind of lenses among my students, and they see like how their actions is also like making challenges for others. So I think those actually really helpful tools that any kind of I think educators can use. And this is not only like for climate change, I think obviously for other reasons, but you can like see like this kind of like building soft skills also like can translate to like make an like active role for the students to like what they can do from their own perspectives.
Thank you, Abdul. I think it's really powerful what you shared about students kind of taking the perspective of their peers and classmates, and then having the self-awareness to recognize how they can change their own behaviors to conserve water and act with compassion and kindness to help their peers. It's very moving. Anything else that anyone else on the panel would like to add about empathy and climate change? Okay, we can go ahead and keep moving. I know we have a lot to get through. So our next question is about climate action, which you all have shared a little bit about already, but it would be great to hear just some more concrete ideas on how students can take action towards climate change, and some projects that they can maybe even complete in their communities or their classrooms, and maybe any specific examples that you've seen in the classroom or in your community. And I would love to start back with Jennifer again.
Thanks, Travis. It's an exciting time right now as educators are looking to find ways to connect and engage within projects, support their students to take action. I know for me, when I kind of started to move into the space of virtual exchange and cultural exchange back in 2010, so we were equipped with technology, which at the time there weren't a lot of schools that had that. I think we're seeing that change, so we're more ready now for that. But like Abdul said, we were a school wanting to find ways that our students could hear from others, people who may not live and look like them, and that perspective taking, that active listening was something we were committed to. So virtual exchange and using ed tech for social good made a lot of sense, but it was really hard. And I know Travis has heard me talk about this before, because when Empatico came around and when other virtual exchange platforms that were prioritizing connection, that was something I had always waited for. because it took us a long time. So at my school, I think we were trying to connect with a school. I'm in Florida, they were in Spain, and it took about 6 months. And now we can get on and we can find classrooms within like 5 minutes. So what we wanted to do in bringing teachers and students together around climate change specifically, we weren't able to find at the time. So we decided to build it ourselves. We were like, let's bring some teachers together and let's just see who wants to join. So that was, and we're in year 7 of our climate action project, which kicks off next week. So that's a 6-week project all around taking action at every level, small actions that collectively add up. But we've seen a lot of other requests for other programs to build around climate action. So I think that idea of projects, a time-bound learning experience where teachers that may not yet feel comfortable, but when they can lock arms with other teachers and go forward, that kind of gives them the strength to proceed. So now there are a lot of resources. So if you're an educator and you're looking for a project, I think a lot of people on this panel today or who are in the conversation and can share in the chat have either created or have been a part of projects where students can join together around this idea of climate action. Just some lessons learned that I've thought about with our instructional design. And so when we built the climate action project, and then all of our projects really, that's something where we say, okay, how do we design for the world? So our programs are free, we want them to be accessible. And so there's a lot of questions that come up on that. And so lessons I've learned that teachers can also bring back to their classrooms if they want to create their own project or create their lessons is teachers as co-constructors of that learning. And so this climate was like the ultimate for me because I'd been talking about getting the teacher out of the front of the room. How can you work alongside your students? And that's really hard when you know the answer. But in this conversation, teachers may not know the answer. So it is this authentic co-construction process. So that was one big thing. As I mentioned before, the vulnerability of teachers. And we can be like, I'm not sure, I'm curious, do you want to learn with me? The other thing that we had a big design challenge of, how do you build a lesson for the world when you have students of all ages, when you have different backgrounds with resources and with teaching climate, and different resource levels. So some classrooms we work with have 3-to-1 with tech. Some teachers are using their iPhone and trying to find a hotspot within their local area. So we build around inquiry. So we're posing a lot of questions. We're having students do research, take action. And then I think finally, the biggest part and what I think differentiates a lot of us here from some other programs that I see is that idea of connection. How can we ensure that our students aren't just reading about climate change and even more specifically climate action, but they're actually connecting with other people and hearing those stories. So this, very much like the pandemic, is something that we all on this planet are experiencing, and we all have different connections to it. So I'm here in Florida, we're feeling the effects with hurricanes. I talked to teachers in New Jersey and they're like, oh, we feel it. And I heard from youth in Hawaii, and they just faced terrible tragedy because of climate change. So that connection piece, I think, is critical. But I really do believe in projects. I think they're a great first step for teachers if they're looking to get involved in something that can be sustained over time.
Thank you, Jen. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned about how our small actions can add up. And I saw that someone shared something similar in the chat too. And the data shows that these individual actions do add up. And as we talked about earlier, that they can cultivate a sense of empowerment and hope that we're making a difference and making the world a better place. But at the same time, we might struggle with, there's a question that actually someone submitted from the audience earlier. how can students take their contributions as individuals seriously when the biggest changes need to happen at national and international levels? And I really love this question and would love to open it up to the panel to share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Travis, I think that's a really interesting way. And I think, thank you, Elaine, for everything you shared in this discussion about hope. I think what fills me with hope, right, is those small things that I watch students do every day, even though they probably in their heart of hearts believe, right, that they or know that we have to have a larger contributions at the regional, national, international level. I think those small steps, I think, are very empowering to them. And I actually do think that students, to Jen's point about projects and the power of a project in helping them see the difference that they make. I think sometimes as teachers, we think that the projects have to be something that is huge. We have many projects with the NASA Globe program where they're monitoring just simple meteorological data, right? Air temperature and the discussion is a comparison between what they expected, to Jen's point, what we expect as a measure of climate and what they got, right, as in weather. But also then I think it allows them, as we connect globally, to take advantage of that common ground that they have. We're in a very agricultural area. We connect with classrooms in other areas of the world that agriculture plays such a significant role. So I think I think taking advantage of the things that have been shared so far, I think actually empowers kids.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to hear from the audience any of your ideas, ways that we can encourage climate action among our students and children. We've, again, included a few ideas here of sample student projects. And so, Mike, you were just mentioning kind of ideas of projects. It can be something really simple to something really big, but we wanted to share a few thoughts. Anything else anyone in the panel would add around ideas for ways students can get involved with climate action?
There is the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act of 2023. And when I see writing letters, there needs to be advocacy from around. These are people that are in the United States that could write letters to their congresspersons to say, we need this, because the emphasis of this act is providing hubs around the country that would look at the area of prevention, of how we can help create well-being hubs, so that when these climate events do have, that people are already prepared on the ground. Hopefully this could mitigate some of the psychological and social fallout that happens because of climate change.
Thanks, Elaine. And I would also like to add that in California, there's a lot of sustainable school gardens popping up, and teachers positioned as those co-constructors of knowledge with the students, and students coming up with ideas of how can we grow food for a change in climate, and also a growing population has been popular.
That's amazing. I've certainly seen quite a lot of that in New York City schools as well. Right. I want to pause just for a second. If there was anything from the chat, turn it to Maho. Anything that we'd like to highlight from the audience of action students can take?
Yes, we have something, Tiffany, she's in California, and she shared that at her school, they've started school site food waste audits. And this has been a very empowering experience for the kids at their school. Thank you for sharing that.
Amazing. Yes, thank you, Tiffany. Okay, we'll move us on to the next question. What are some ways to integrate climate change education into subjects like SEL, math, literature, and civics? And I would love to start with Mike on this one.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, the ways that we can integrate this are nearly endless. I think what is the challenge with climate education is that climate itself, to my mind, is an umbrella issue that impacts so many other parts of our lives. And we tend, my goal is to help my future teachers that I work with to be able to teach with the Sustainable Development Goals and not just about the Sustainable Development Goals. And climate in our work is central to being able to do that. So it's not only that we're trying to integrate across disciplines, moving from science to mathematics to social emotional learning to civics, but that in a sense, climate itself is interdisciplinary, right? And an understanding from that. They're just the power of story, the power of the projects that Jenn's project in particular, bringing the lives of the people that are impacted by climate is just such an impactful way to bring an understanding. You know, people sort of describe themselves as not being able, or teachers describe themselves as not being able to do climate education because they're not a scientist. I think some of the most impactful things are occurring, not the science itself is very impactful, but the impact that it has on people is really where climate education, I think, comes to life in a classroom. And a platform like Empatico that gives us the way to be able to connect classroom to classroom at that really personal level is just such a great opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. And I think you touched on the power of storytelling. I mean, story is the connection there to literature, of course, and the science of climate change, but then also, as we talked about earlier, empathy and kind of the social emotional learning aspect of it as well. Anything anyone else would like to add?
I get one thing to add, Travis, and build on what Mike said. When I was looking at the photos that you shared on the previous question, and just that they all look so different. So it's not this one uniform way at coming at these problems, and it is across the curriculum. So we see arts teachers who are saying, okay, I'm able to bring this idea into my arts lessons and create theater productions or advocacy campaigns or music performances. We're seeing world language teachers do great things. Library media specialists, ed tech coaches, a group that's new for me, but I'm seeing really rise up, are PE coaches. And I was kind of curious about that, wondering how are they connecting this? But then I started to ask those questions, and PE teachers saying, well, I'm the teacher that is faced with climate change every day. I might not be able to be outside because of weather, and we are connected to the earth and to nature, and we can do wellness walks. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't have thought about that. So I think this idea of crossing the curriculum to talk about climate change and talking about that we can do that, because a lot of teachers also feel that it does need to be reserved for the environmental science high school course, but this is something we all can do. So that's just something I noticed in the photos, and then in reflecting on what Mike said.
Thank you. That's really interesting about PE teachers, and not something I'd heard, but it makes sense. And we, in working with Jenn at the UCI Science Project, also as part of the Empathetic Environmentalist program, created some resources around, like you said, like a wellness walk, a mindful walk in your community, and kind of what do you observe, what do you notice? So that can be really powerful. Maybe one more related question from the audience, a couple of questions. How early should we start talking about climate change with students? And how do we talk to students in early education about climate change? We'll open that up to anyone to jump in.
Yeah, I don't know if there is an age that's too early to start to talk about climate change, or to sort of as a developmental sequence to be able to talk about climate. I mean, Jenn did a great job explaining the difference between climate and weather. I'm just fascinated by the number of people that you meet that don't know that difference between that. So the gift that we could offer even in early childhood classrooms to start to understand the difference between those. So to my mind, in our early childhood program, we talk about climate and climate change, right? And being climate change, meaning the difference between what we were predicting we were going to get and what we got, right? In a sense. I think it's a really important point though, Travis, because I think a lot of teachers, even at the middle school and high school level, have shied away from this because of the coming from the opposite extreme, right? The severity, the focus on natural disaster as a measure of the impact of climate change, and not wanting to bring that into a classroom. I think as sad and as devastating as that can be, I don't think we're doing students a service by not talking about that. You know, I mean, Elaine has a much deeper understanding of that, but I think in some ways, in not addressing it, I think we aren't giving the opportunity for students to express some of the emotions that they're having about it.
And Mike, can I just add to what you said, is that I think when I hear about the wellness walk, for example, and we are looking at the environment, the wellness walk also happens to help us as human beings in terms of the organicity of bringing us back to a zone of well-being. So I think there can be both things happening at the same time for very little ones to understand that connection between themselves and their environment that may not be as explicit as, you know, talking about some of the scientific aspects that they may not cognitively be able to grasp yet. But I have a 7-year-old granddaughter, and I'm always so shocked at how much she understands about everything. And certainly 5-year-olds understand about a lot of things, as many of you educators, of course, know. But I think that there's ways of integrating it that also supports the well-being of our children as well, as they see that they're part of the environment.
Thank you.
And Elaine, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to add, and that was like completely the purpose of building that empathy into that nature walk. And we thought that it's never too early to start talking about climate change to the littles, but it could be simply just focusing on nature or animals, plants, the natural world that the students are part of. And, you know, what kid doesn't love wildlife, right?
Absolutely. Thank you all. I'm gonna keep.
If I may,
Oh,
so
go ahead.
if I may just want to add a little bit, I think one of the thing also, like, since we are advocating for like starting climate education from the very early grades, one of the reason actually also I think behind like the most of the habits the kids are like built in the early ages, and just imagine how it might look like if all the kids all around the world are very conscious about their footprint, carbon footprint from the very early age. You really think about like how their every choices, maybe even like when they're making the decision about their fast fashion, about their clothing, so that has also an impact on the climate change and how that might translate into the future generation. So I think like building those kind of habits very early and building that awareness, oftentimes when we like see the the solution of the climate change, particularly the mitigation and adaptation pieces, it's mostly focusing on like the change in the policy, in the systems, or like the bill or like other stuffs. But when they can really reflect on their own situation and they can build something like the positive climate friendly like the habits from the early age, I think that way they can also like contribute to be the part of the solution of the climate change effects.
Thank you, Abdul. Just to keep us moving, could you share some advice for educators who want to teach climate change from a culturally responsive approach? For this one, I'll turn it back to Jenn to start us off.
Thanks, Travis. I would just say it's as simple as learning about your students, right? So if you can learn about your students and their backgrounds, also their experiences, their prior knowledge, and even their perspectives, you could just start there and position them as the knowers. Just like Elaine said, her grandkid knows so much at an early age, and all of our students come to us with this prior knowledge. So why not pull that knowledge and use it, right? So that we can incorporate it into our lessons, so that students can have a good approach to learning about climate change. So an example I had when I was teaching a group of students was a student brought in their indigenous knowledge, right? So oftentimes they position themselves as part, right, of nature. Jennifer Williams earlier mentioned how we're actually connected to earth and nature, and that's exactly it, right? So using that knowledge that students have and really empowering them to be the lifelong learners so that they can come up with those climate solutions in our class. And I'll go ahead and pass it to, I believe, Michael. Did you have something?
Yeah, no, Jen, thank you for sharing what you shared. I think the focus of any of this work and trying to be culturally responsible is starting with that understanding of the children in your classroom, understanding of the children that are in other classrooms. So the benefit that empathy and a platform like Empatico brings is that opportunity to be able to learn from each other and celebrate the common pieces that we have and use that to distract from what divides us around some of these things. You know, our biggest challenge here and what makes climate a wicked problem is that in our area this will be our third year of an extended growing season, and so to listen to the perspective that people bring and trying to help them understand sort of the issue was something that appears, at least at the surface, maybe was positive out of something that they really deep down, I think, understand is a real challenge. So I think it is about understanding and coming from a science perspective. I think we've made a great mistake in the past by trying to separate the person, right, from the science that we're trying to help students understand.
Thank you, Mike. You mentioned kind of the power of coming together in the things that we have in common and rather than the things that divide us, which I think is a great segue into our next question is how can we motivate others to fight climate change, especially when there are political divisions in our community? And I would love to start with Jennifer for this question.
Thanks, Travis. So we've felt this for a while. I think with some of our projects like the Climate Action Project, the Goals Project, we've had individual teachers signing on and then being faced with some resistance within their school boards, parent groups. That I feel like we're seeing some change here in the United States with that, but for us, we view our work possibly as disruptive, but really not defiant. So we're trying to work with what's already working within curricula. We're trying to bring focus to, as we've I think all been talking about, this idea of hope and optimism and great things that are already happening. How can we build on that? But what we found is language really does matter. So we did a research study this past year with Shift Sustainability at earthday.org. And one of the biggest themes that came out of that was that we're using a lot of different language to describe climate action education. So some groups are talking about climate literacy, which I know a lot in California, that's a big term there. Other groups around the world are talking about education for sustainable development, ESD. We're all saying different things about the same thing. So then that makes us question, do we want to have uniform language? But some states that I approach, if I talk about climate change or climate action first, no matter what we're doing, it could be a no from the beginning. So what we do is we think, okay, how can we go in, even if we're all going to be doing the same work and it feels good when they're in, and talk about things that do resonate with those groups. So thinking about language, I think first, and then the other part when we're talking about this division is just connect early, connect to each other, connect to the land. As Jenn mentioned, I think early years, early childhood, when we start to have those connections, when we have 3, 4, 5-year-olds. I mean, Pataco's really believed in doing this early on since you all started. But that changes things, and it might take a little bit more time, but I think that's a great way for us to start. I know we're going to get close on time here, but just to bring back some of the words from students from this week, I noted in a panel at the Ford Foundation this week at UNGA, there were 14-year-old students from Kamehameha schools in Hawaii. They were joined there by their governor, Josh Green. And they were asked a question of, how do we move forward with this political divide? And they had advice for us. So each of the 4 students shared one thing. I wrote them down to tell you all. So one student said, which I love this one, we need to agree on something, we need to move forward. So I think that just the idea of agreement is a good start. Something I think a lot of us here believe in is empower many youth voices and make sure that the youth have a say in the decisions. And then the 4th student or youth said, consider the voices of underrepresented people. So I think that I get a lot of inspiration from the young people with those ideas. And I think we just need to keep moving. We have to keep moving forward. And if some groups aren't yet ready, I think eventually we'll see them finding ways to join in a way that's comfortable for them.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would love to spend more time on this question. I think it's such an interesting topic, but as you said, I'm cognizant of time and want to end with our last question here and hear from everyone on our panel just quickly. If you could solve just one issue related to climate change, again, just one, what would it be? And pose the same question to our audience. What issue would you solve? And if you could share it in the chat box. Abdul, can I start with you?
Sure. I think one of the things that I really want to do, I think just to instill the mindset among the young children, really want to be the change that you want to see in the world. And that instilling that kind of mindset or values, I think really important. And parallelly also giving them the agency or the distinguish between the freedom and responsibility, how they're making choices each of the days, and how that contribute to their actions in the climate realities.
Abdul. Elaine, can you go next?
I would say that I would want to reduce the suffering of children and the adults who love them and care for them. And one of the ways to reduce the suffering, I think, in this area are the things we've been talking about. It may not be the large steps, but the small steps where they see, oh, that made a difference when we went on that wellness walk and I learned about my environment. So the ways that we can instill hope that can reduce suffering.
Thank you, Elaine. Jenn, next.
I think this is probably a really big issue, but I think climate change impacts the most marginalized communities the most, right? So big ask, but that one issue would be something to reduce the suffering of the marginalized communities because of climate change.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Well, this is a huge question, and I could have big, giant dreams, but I'll focus on the things I'm working on each day. And 2 things, both related to, I think, systems level thinking. One is just society's view of education. And hopefully we're starting to see it more across industry and government, taking us seriously and understanding the value that educators, students, and schools can bring into all things, but definitely this work around climate education, climate action. And then within schools, on the same idea of systems thinking, is just access for teacher professional development and finding ways for teachers to be able to see where it fits into their curriculum.
Thank you. And Mike, could you? wrap
Yeah,
us up?
I think at the risk of having too big an idea, I think I wish people would give themselves the grace to be able to take a breath when they hear a perspective that is different from theirs, instead of reacting, to listen and try to make that connection to the person and trying to understand why they have the perspective they have.
Thank you, Mike. Well, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much to our panel today. I'm certainly feeling inspired and eager to get out and take climate action after hearing from all of you, and hopeful about the future. Thank you again to Jennifer from the Longview Foundation for being here and for all of your support with this work. And thank you to Jenn for the partnership with the UCI Science Project and the Empathetic Environmentalist Program. We have everyone's contact information here. Thank you all for graciously sharing that with our audience. We'll be sure to share these slides out with everyone after, so you'll be able to jot this information down. We'll send that out by email, as well as some resources that we've shared from Empatico and from others who've joined the panel today as well around mindfulness, some teaching materials that many of which we've discussed today, like the nature walk, some additional resources. And then I just want to end by sharing a fun announcement that we're launching a new environmental program on the Empatico platform to help make it easier for educators who are interested in these topics to find each other. You can scan this QR code. We're also sharing the interest form in the chat. But we'd love for you to join and begin connecting with each other. And we'll be sharing out a lot of the resources that we've created in partnership with the Longview Foundation and the UCI Science Project. So thank you all again for joining today. Thank you to our panel, and have a lovely week and rest of your day.